All right, so let's go ahead and get started with my special guest, Matt Taibbi. Welcome back.
How are you doing, Sabrina?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How have you been? I don't know if you've heard like any the new like local news here from Massachusetts. I heard the other day that the Patriots just picked up Ezekiel
Zeke Elliott. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, of course. I would. I still watch the Boston sports news. That's the first thing I do every morning. Sadly, but
is it weird like being a Boston sports fan in New Jersey?
I hide it, and I try not to force it on my kids either. Although they're all sort of organically Red Sox fans, which is interesting. But no, in this part of the world, you can't admit it. My Red Sox hats have never been outside my house.
I know whenever I travel, if I wear like any Boston sports stuff, like I actually had someone come up to me in Chicago and they said, the Patriots, the most hated team in America. I was like, geez.
I know people they'll just start things with you, about that whole situation. People get very emotional about the Patriots, especially during that Brady period. It was ugly, but sadly that's over. So we're back to mediocrity now.
I know. Do you think? What do you think about like the Red Sox? Because I know like a month or two ago, people were saying, "Oh my God, the Red Sox are so bad," but it's still early, and I feel like I've heard that for the past couple of years. It's still early. I know they're rebuilding, but do you think that they still have a chance, or do you think they need a new coach?
I love the direction of the Red Sox. I'm one of the sort of build through the farm team types. I think the young guys, Bayo and Duran, even the catcher Connor Wong. I was a catcher my whole life, so I watched this kid, and he's got a great arm. And baseball drives me crazy because the sport now is structured so that you basically automatically lose your star if you're not the Dodgers or the Yankees, and so you have to do this strategy where you bank on young players who come up, and I think they've done a good job with that. And I find that more exciting than paying $400 million for somebody and hoping they don't tear their ankle up. So
yeah, I hear you. What do you think about like and then we'll get into like the more heavy topics, but what do you think about like the Celtics? Because to me, sometimes it's kind of frustrating that they make it to the playoffs and they get there, like almost there. But for whatever reason, I feel like they'll play great all season. And then when we get into like the championship series, it seems like all of a sudden Jason Tatum can't make shots. You have to depend on the other players on the team. Do you think that's just nerves, or you think like he still needs more time to get there?
I mean, they're still young. It's kind of amazing how far they've come, in the first years in the league. But there's definitely a thing about in the playoffs, you need that one person who's an alpha who can score at the end of the game. And I grew up watching Celtics. I was actually never a Celtics fan when I was a kid. I was embarrassingly a Houston Rockets fan. I was a big fan of Hakeem Olajuwon. And but my father was a big Celtics fan, so I used to go to the games all the time. And Bird was just such a killer, and you need to have that in the playoffs. You need to have that kind of personality who is maybe not the nicest person, but knows how to do things at the end of a game. And some of those guys have to learn how to be like that. I think LeBron was that kind of player who needed to learn it. I can't believe I'm talking about this, but what do you think? I'm curious to hear your opinion.
I think I would really like to see them win a championship game this year. It's really interesting. Like when we got Kyrie Irving, we were like, oh man, this is it. We're winning the championship this year. And then Kyrie was injured, but I felt like even after Kyrie was injured, I felt like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they played really hard against like Cleveland when LeBron was still with Cleveland. And I was like, wow, we actually may have a shot at this, without Kyrie. Then that next season when Kyrie came back, I was like, we're not playing as good. Now,
yeah.
It was weird, but I think that I think they have to get it together when it comes to those playoff games. They really have to play just as strong as they do during the regular season. And that's why I said, I don't know what it is. Like, I sat there the championship games and I was like, if I see Jason Tatum shoot one more brick, I'm going to scream. Like, these are easy shots. I can make these shots, Matt. I can make these shots. So for me, I'm just like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sad. I think they'll get there though. I mean, they've got the horses to do it, and assuming Porzingis' leg doesn't fall off, which is something I'm very worried about. He's an underrated player. I think he's kind of the type of person they needed. Was just a big dude who can get a bucket, and we'll see. But they're a fun team to watch. The game's obviously changed a lot, but they have exactly the right kinds of players to win, I think. So it should be cool to watch.
Awesome. So now I want to get into some of the more heavy-hitting topics. Last time you were here was right after the hearing when you testified in front of Congress in reference to the Twitter files. And then not too long after that, there was this report that the IRS came to your house apparently during that time when you were testifying. I want to hear a little bit more about that, or as much as you can discuss. Why do you believe that they showed up to your house? Do you feel that they had a legitimate reason to be there? Or do you feel like this was an intimidation tactic?
It's impossible to say what exactly it was. I wish I could say definitively one way or the other. When that first happened, I didn't say anything publicly because there were no indications as to whether it was random or, whether it was somehow tied to whatever was going on. It seemed like an extraordinary coincidence, but hey, those things happen. So I did feel like ethically I had to inform the committee in case this was intimidation. It would have been irresponsible not to inform them that might be going on. They then made a very big deal out of it, and kind of bigger than I expected them to. It turned into this big national news story. And as a consequence of that, they ended up sending a letter where we got all this information about what actually happened. And at that point, that's when I got nervous, because I saw the report, including there's one page that says open date for the investigation, and it's 12/24/22, which is a Saturday and Christmas Eve. And that was a day when I was putting probably the scariest of the Twitter files reports out. I was in a hotel room in San Francisco. Who in the IRS works on a Saturday on Christmas Eve? So that was weird. Then they were looking, to see if I had a carry permit. There was all kinds of stuff in there about, articles that I had written, things that I had said and that had been said about me, and that clearly had nothing to do with my revenue status or, what kind of work I did. That was unnerving. And then I found from other people who had gone through similar things that this is not an uncommon situation. So it did result, as you probably heard, after that, the Treasury Department announced that they're going to be curtailing those kinds of home visits, which sounds like it's tied to this incident. They didn't say it was political, but my sense is that it's a mighty big coincidence. But you can never say for sure.
100%. How do you feel about, I'm sure you saw the testimony that RFK Jr. gave about censorship in front of Congress as well. How do you feel about the way that he was treated? I know, because you went through the experience, it seemed like to me like they wouldn't even allow him to speak about censorship. It's almost as though they were trying to censor him while he was testifying in front of them. How do you feel about the way that he was treated? And do you have any concerns in reference to if any of these government agencies, whether it's the IRS, et cetera, will try to target RFK Jr. in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, watching that was amazing. It's funny because I was prepared for it to be weird, having gone through that exact situation. If you go back and look at the tape of Michael Schellenberger and I testifying, you'll see that there are multiple moments where we kind of look at each other with this half bemused, half horrified look on our faces. As spectators, it was really weird to be part of, because these Democratic members were so unbelievably aggressive, and not just insulting, but almost threatening. The optics of it were really strange, and I thought maybe I was missing something, that there was some element of this situation that I hadn't been briefed on, that they were crazy. But then when I watched the RFK hearing, it was even significantly worse than what we went through. That bizarre move with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, moving to try to take the entire hearing into executive session, basically saying this is sort of an exaggeration of Elon Musk's speech not reach doctrine, saying like, oh, we're not going to shut down his speech, we're just going to make sure that nobody except us sees it. For them to not see that the optics of that were strange, and a hearing that supposedly was about censorship, tells you how crazy it's gotten on the Hill. And it does make you think. I think that a lot of the people who are involved in government now, they just don't have any sense of the sort of traditional concerns about civil liberties or any of those things. Some of them, I think, don't even know what those laws are, or don't know what's in the First Amendment, or don't know that you're supposed to give people due process. And so I wouldn't put it past them to do all kinds of things to RFK. We saw in the Twitter files that there were numerous attempts to try to get him removed from the internet. So I think anything can happen, which is unfortunate.
Very much so. I'm also curious in reference to that particular situation. It was interesting to me that they even allowed RFK Jr. to come testify, because they've been so critical of him, and they've been trying to silence him. His channel was removed from YouTube. I believe he's trying to implement a lawsuit against Google right now because of that, because he is a presidential candidate. And then there's also this issue where he is not being allowed to have Secret Service, which other presidential candidates have had and are allowed to have. It's almost as if they're trying to make sure that he will not be protected in any way, shape, or form. And I'm curious in reference to the censorship issue, now that this has kind of been on the world stage, so to speak, because of these hearings, there's been multiple hearings and the UFO hearings as well. Do you feel that more Americans, number one, are even paying attention to this, or are waking up to just how much our government tries to silence us? And if they are, do you feel there'll be changes in reference to how people vote politically?
Well, I sure hope so. I started covering the internet censorship issue in 2018. You might remember after Alex Jones got taken down, there was this weird incident that they called the Purge, where a group of I think it was 811 Facebook accounts were just zapped. They were removed by Facebook. And this was done in consultation with the Atlantic Council, which the Senate had basically asked Facebook to work with. And they said that the problem was coordinated inauthentic activity. And I called up a bunch of these sites, and the legend is that this is all about conservatives, that they're the people who are being censored, or that it's conservatives and libertarians. The Purge, actually, those original accounts, there were a whole group of them that were actually either left-leaning or just sort of blandly democratic. There was a site called Reverb Press. There was another one called the Everlasting GOP Stoppers. There were lots of police brutality sites like Cop Watch and Cop Block. Police the Police was another one, Anti-Media. And, I called some of these folks, and they were, it was interesting. I had worked in alternative newspapers, as a younger person. So I was familiar with the phenomenon of putting all your money into a publishing organization and kind of self-publishing and making a go out of it. And that's what they were doing. These were mom and pop small businesses that were pouring, in some cases, $2,000 to $3,000 a week into Facebook ad boosting tools to try to build a business. And they had done that for years and were being successful. And suddenly it's just gone. It's, they took it away with no due process, no anything. And I thought that was horrible. But even worse was the reaction of colleagues and media. I started to tell these stories, and because this was happening at the time when everybody was worried about Russian bots and believed that was the cause of Trump getting elected, everybody I knew was like, who cares? It's nothing. Don't worry about it. And, from there, then there was the whole thing where Google changed its algorithm and Truth Out and, the World Socialist website and all these sites lost their traffic because they changed the way they do the search returns. Nobody cared about that. One of the things I'm happy about is that the Twitter files, then that mixed with the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit, mixed with the hearings, mixed now with the Facebook files, has made this issue impossible to ignore. Everybody's cognizant of it. And instead of denying that it's happening, basically what people are saying is it's happening, but it has to happen. Like, it's necessary. And that's important, because now we're actually talking about what it is. Because I think most Americans instinctively find this repugnant. And once the issue gets in front of enough people, then there will be some kind of referendum on it. It could happen as quickly as this lawsuit, by the way, which could easily change the entire landscape, without even a vote in Congress, which would be very interesting.
It would be interesting. Why do you think that people are now, well, not everyone, but some people, particularly, I would say liberal outlets, now it's all of a sudden it's a right-wing talking point to be against censorship? Like, where did this come from? I felt like that was something that like Democrats or leftists or progressives were really passionate about, not censoring people. But now it's like, if you come out against censorship, whether it was you, whether it was Elon Musk, whether it's RFK Jr., now you're considered to be a right-wing. Where do you think that came from?
It's such a weird thing culturally, isn't it? Because, I grew up, that was the defining issue I always felt for somebody who was on the political left. Every one of the sort of famous political legends of liberalism had in some way to do with this issue, whether it was the ACLU defending Skokie, the Nazis in Skokie, whether the People versus Larry Flint, right, the Hustler magazine story, fighting against restrictions against NWA, the Parents Music Resource Center case, the Mapplethorpe case. This is one controversy after another, and it was automatic that people on the left were in favor of free expression, understood the importance of it, understood why also. I mean, this is something that I think has been lost. The Skokie case, the Nazi case, the reasoning for that was so obvious, and they articulated it over and over again. They said that if we don't step in to allow these folks to march in Skokie, Illinois, the thing that will happen the next day is that every small southern town in America is going to disallow NAACP marches. The civil rights movement will not be allowed to go forward once small governments are allowed to control speech. And I thought that was sort of irrefutable logic. Now it's just not part of the way people think on the political left. I think they think that deplatforming works, and that people like Donald Trump are such a threat that we have to use these tools. But the problem is the tools don't work, and more than that, it's just impossible to arbitrate what's true and what's false with accuracy, and that's the real big problem.
Right. And speaking of NWA, you notice they're doing this to Ice Cube too, again, because they did it a couple years ago when he said, like, why do we have to vote for Democratic Party if they're not giving us anything for our vote? And now you see they're coming after Ice Cube again. Like, now they want to suppress Ice Cube. They don't want him to talk. And he's been going on to different podcast shows. And I'm just like, do you guys remember who Ice Cube is? You remember what he told us? Remember what he said about the police? Like, he still feels very strongly about the police, but they don't want him to talk to certain people. So he had an interview recently with Tucker Carlson. People came after him for that. They came after him for saying, like, you don't have to vote for, Trump or Biden. You don't have to vote for the Democratic Party. And it just seems like a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of these accounts are just bots, but it seems like a lot of people are they're just confined into like this bubble where if you step outside of that bubble, you're seen to be a problem. And it's really weird to me.
Yeah, it's funny watching that whole phenomenon with Ice Cube. When I see that, I think of songs of his like "When Will They Shoot," right? Like, because he was always back in the day rapping about how somebody was going to come out and shut him up, right? Like, if they had to use a gun to do it, they were going to do him like Malcolm, right? Like that's one of the things that he was always talking about, and back then it was because they were rapping about the police or whatever the issue of the day was. But it's similar now. I mean, I think there's a same kind of vibe as in the air of, if you step a little bit outside the lines, we're going to have this enforcement mechanism that is really effective, and it's just odd to see it manifesting itself in the same way that we used to think of, people like Ed Meese or Falwell or whatever. Like, that's now the norm in Democratic Party politics, and it's just trippy to watch that.
How did you feel when you had the interview with Mehdi Hasan? And we watched it on here. I was so frustrated at Mehdi Hasan.
No, he got me. Look, I wasn't prepared, but anyway, go ahead. Yeah,
I was like, wow. But how did you feel like doing that, going into that interview? Because to me, it kind of felt like it didn't feel like it was an interview. I felt like he was interrogating you, and you were, basically like in court. And I felt like you were being interrogated by Mehdi Hasan. Not only that, but some of the so-called errors that he pointed out, you were actually correct on. But it's almost like I felt like he didn't really give you the opportunity because he kept interrupting you. And then obviously it seemed like to me that his mic, he had a louder mic. Obviously he's in a mic'd up studio. So he was interrupting you, over talking you. And I was just like, looking back on it, would you do it again? Because for me, I think when I was watching this, I was like, no, Matt, don't do this interview.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it again. And that's too bad, because I actually believe that one of the reasons I did the interview is because I think part of this job is that you have to face your critics, and even if it's hostile and it's a drag, if you get through it, you're making a point that you're not afraid to listen to everything that people have to say about your reporting or pointing out flaws or whatever it is. And I had specifically criticized MSNBC quite a bit for refusing to talk about especially their Russia reporting. So I thought it would have been hypocritical for me not to go on. However, I'm not great on television, first of all. The other thing is I was not prepared. Usually I'm fine because the reporting is all nailed down. And in the worst case scenario, I can just say, okay, well, go read the piece if you have an issue. But here, I was surprised by something that I wasn't aware of. There were these issues in the piece. And as you note, some of the things I wasn't exactly... there was one that was an error, but it was a very inconsequential error, and I didn't pick up on the fact on the air that he was actually trying to make it into something that was much bigger than it seemed. One of the reasons the video looks so bad is because I'm kind of looking into the camera saying, oh yeah, I did write CIS instead of CISA or whatever it was, not realizing that to him this was a big deal, because now I was implicating an intelligence agency instead of an NGO. if I had understood that context, I probably would have fought back harder, but I didn't. And, that's the difference between a television professional and somebody like me. So it's too bad. It's unfortunate that it happened that way.
Did you think it was a coincidence or a strange coincidence, considering like after that interview, Stacey Plaskett, issued that statement where she basically wanted to try to get you for perjury? It almost kind of felt like the media and at least the committee members, it's almost like they were in on this together to try to like take you down.
Well, yeah, there was a straight line you could draw from Mehdi in tweeting to AOC retweeting Mehdi to, Stacey Plaskett basically repeating the sentiments of AOC. And, when I heard about the letter, it's really funny. I didn't even get the letter. That's one of the odder little twists of the whole situation, is that they were threatening me with jail, but I had to wait for Li Fong to obtain the document somehow. But at that point, I tweeted to Mehdi and I said, hey, come on now, like, all jokes aside, you've made a mistake with this thing. Yes, I did have a typo, but we're not going to push this to the point where I'm going to be prosecuted and put in jail. I got kids, come on. And he didn't say anything, which I thought was kind of telling. I mean, it tells you how serious these folks are. They really mean it. They're not just, it's not performative, this whole thing, which I think is an important aspect to a lot of what's going on with this sort of drift towards authoritarianism. It's not for show. They mean it. They really want to push the envelope of what it means to have power and to threaten people. And, this is an example of that.
That's right. And speaking of having power, you wrote an article recently, which I think everyone needs to read this. It says Campaign 2024, not left versus right, but affluent versus everyone else. It says the realignment of major parties away from blue against red and towards a rich versus poor dynamic is America's most undercovered political story. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I do feel like this is where we're headed. And I feel like there are a lot of people that kind of like jump in whenever you bring up this issue about top versus bottom or rich versus poor. They will jump in as deflectors and try to bring it back to Donald Trump, or try to bring it back to we could get the crazy far right, and not comment on the issue of poor and affluent. And I don't know if you saw this video recently. There was a video went viral called Alabama Mama, where she just went on this rant talking about how it's basically this, affluent class now, and everybody else is at the bottom, where the middle class has pretty much been wiped away. And I want to get your opinion about that, because I feel like heading into 2024, I'm seeing it again, where a lot of people are focused on, you got to go vote for Biden because we don't want to get Donald Trump, not mentioning the fact that both of them are corporate and both of them are affluent. So either way, if you're poor or if you're working class, you're still going to lose. And it just seems like to me, you would think that the majority of Americans would get this by now. But I feel like there's a lot of people who still really believe we have to vote for one of these teams, whether it's red or blue. And I want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is something I've thought about for, I don't know, almost 20 years now. I've been covering presidential campaigns since 2004, and it's something we started to notice, I think, in 08, and then especially in 12, is this pretty dramatic change in the composition of the electorate. So just to take an example, if you go back to the year Clinton was elected in 1992, the most affluent congressional districts were somewhere between 60 and 65% likely to be Republican back then. So the top class sort of 1% voter was sometimes sort of self-interestedly voting for Republican politicians, either for tax reasons or because they were actually politically conservative or whatever. But in the period since then, the Democrats really stressed this idea of we're moving away from being backed by unions. We're going to vote for NAFTA. We're going to start competing for donations from Wall Street. We're going to help deregulate, allow the Citigroup merger, deregulate commodities trading, all of these things that led to the 2008 crash. And the Democratic Party, I think, basically left behind all of its class-based politics, moved to this paradigm where they campaigned almost entirely on social issues like, choice, which isn't bad. It just means that it's different, right? They were getting a different kind of voter. And now, Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, I put this in the piece I wrote. She put a chart up showing like the richest congressional districts in America and the poorest congressional districts in America. And you can see that on one side, it's almost all blue, and at the bottom, it's almost all red. And she was saying, how is it possible that the Republicans are representing the people who are struggling now? And that's the reason for that is that there's been this shift in how you predict who's going to vote for whom now. Income and education are the absolute predictors over and above almost anything. It used to be like, the abortion issue used to be reign supreme. That's really not the case anymore. Income and education almost signify almost completely. If you live in a very affluent suburb, almost everybody's a Democrat. And the problem with that is that it's left the kind of vanishing middle class voter that you refer to without any good choices. The only choices they had in 2016 that made sense were Bernie, but Bernie, of course, was not going to allow to be, become the Democratic nominee, or this furious nihilistic protest vote, which was Trump. And obviously they voted for him. And I think it's important to understand why, but this all has to do with money to me, and the fact that it's become so much harder for people at the lower end of the spectrum, and nobody will talk about it because nobody wants to admit that dynamic exists.
100%. Because one thing I've noticed over the years too, when we look at a lot of the coastal cities, these coastal states like California, Massachusetts, etc. This is pretty much where the Democratic Party kind of lives now. Like they rely on the coastal academic elite. Even when we look at an organization like DSA, they moved in that direction as well. Like I went to a DSA meeting one time and I was just like, everyone in this room, none of these people are working class,
right?
But they're championing these working class issues, but everyone in this room is pretty much like academic elite. And so I feel like the Democratic Party, they cater to that crowd now versus when Bill Clinton was in office and he really picked up the Rust Belt. He spoke to like the working class. He won states that Democrats would never win now. If you look at the electoral map, but I do feel like there seems to be, and this, having lived in New England, for example, there seems to be this kind of elitist, snobby attitude, especially if you've gone to one of the colleges here on the coast. Whereas like I went to Harvard, so I know this and I'm better than you. And you need to work harder, educate yourself. And that's why you don't understand these issues. And I've heard that type of rhetoric come from some of the most, proud, like liberal Democrat voters, where they will talk down to Trump supporters or people that are living in those red rural areas as if those people are beneath them, instead of trying to work together with them, talking down to the working class. And I think that can be a really big turnoff to a lot of people coming from those areas who are hard workers, but they didn't have the same opportunities that some people may have had who went to a school like Harvard, so to speak. So I've also seen a lot of these coastal cities go from working class to they're heavily gentrified, and it's now just for like professionals. I mean, Boston at one point was a working class city. That's not the case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Today. And when these people are pushed out, like, where do they go?
There's an exodus of people who are moving to southern states, or they're leaving places like California to go to Texas, right? I mean, there's this sort of well-defined phenomenon that's happening. Some of it is sort of traditional white flight, but I think there's a new phenomenon on top of that that's political in the way that you're talking about. I started to worry about this after the 2008 crash. I remember going to a foreclosure court in Florida. They set up these sort of high-speed courts because they were foreclosing so many people they couldn't do it through the regular court system. So they brought these judges out of retirement, and they had these things called rocket dockets where people basically would come in and they'd be thrown out of their houses within 3 minutes. And there was a line of people, and you could see they were white, black, Hispanic, poor, middle class, like there was a whole range of people that was politically diverse. And the rage in that room was, you could like cut it with a knife. It was unbelievable. And I thought, this is untenable. This is not going to last for long. This is going to come out somewhere. Right. And I think that was part of what the seeds of the Trump movement were. I think the Occupy movement was correct when they identified this idea of the 1% versus the 99%, that there's a small minority of people who are doing great and everything makes sense to them. And then there's this sort of widening group of other people who have all kinds of complaints about all these different things. Some of them are working multiple jobs. Some of them, are navigating the ridiculous healthcare system that just makes no sense. And, bankruptcy is automatic if you get sick at a certain time. Like, there's so many reasons to be pissed right now. And they've been denied a real choice in how to deal with these problems. Because there's like basically a status quo party that doesn't do anything, and then the other choice they have is just this ineffectual, nihilistic protest vote. But even so, they're going to do that instead of vote for the status quo. So I think it's sad. I remember talking to Bernie after 2016 and him talking about how he had so much affection for the Democratic Party because when he was a kid, they fought for poor people, and that's why he would never leave the party. But it's not true anymore. I don't think you can say that. There aren't kids like that growing up who feel that way.
Right. Especially when we look at like income inequality. And I know people that they've left these more expensive cities and they've moved further south. Like they've moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, or Austin, Texas. But now, like, even those places are starting to become more expensive too, because they're having an influx of people coming in. So now it's like supply and demand, where all these people are coming in and you need more apartments. And they're like, oh, so we're going to increase the rent because the demand is high. And so the solution to this problem is not to tell people just move down south. And because I used to hear that a lot of people say just move down south. Florida's expensive now. This problem is, there needs to be some type of solution to this problem other than just move somewhere else because the place that you grew up in is unaffordable now. And I'm starting to see a repeat of what I saw after Obama. Like, some of those people that voted for Donald Trump voted for Obama.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
of them voted for Obama twice.
Yeah, and a lot of them came from these sort of formerly thriving, factory towns in Michigan or Ohio or, Youngstown or Flint or, places where there was a middle class once that, maybe they weren't educated, but they could have one income and a family would be relatively secure. There's a lot of anger in those places, as you know, right? I mean, that's not a mystery. And I think there was a lot of belief that Barack Obama was going to come in and he talked the talk for sure in 2008. I believed it. He put distance between himself and Hillary Clinton. He essentially said that, people are hurting out there and we have to do more. And, said he was going to allow, for instance, negotiation of Medicare prices, right, by the government, or reimportation of drugs, and all these things that sounded really great to ordinary people, like that mattered to them. And then he gets elected and, nothing, right? So people are mad, and then they see Obama moving to Martha's Vineyard, which is like the absolute symbol of what you're talking about. Like, I remember Martha's Vineyard when I was a kid. It was a great place that was full of people who, maybe they were fishermen. There were a few rich people, of course, obviously, but you could live there if you were just an ordinary person. Now you have to basically, have be the Sultan of Brunei to have even a small house in Martha's Vineyard. And it's the symbol of this impenetrable upper class society that most people don't have access to. And seeing the former president move there and feel so happy about it, I think is upsetting to a lot of folks, right? And that probably triggers that move to somebody like Trump.
Right. And I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Jackson Hole, Wyoming?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
Yep. Similar
Jackson
thing.
Hole, exactly similar thing. It was a working class town for those who don't know. And then one day celebrities decided that it was a beautiful place and they should move there. So celebrities started buying houses in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And now the people who actually grew up there can't afford to live there because the celebrities came in. And so it's a constant problem. And that's why I'm saying, like, this is happening across the country. And I feel like someone who really gets that and understands that, Cornell West, for example, he's running third party. He's running through the Green Party. As you can imagine, he's already received a lot of hate from people because they're calling him a spoiler. How dare he run in the first place, but how dare he run outside of the Democratic Party? So the Democrats are really afraid that Cornel West is going to ruin things for them, so to speak. But at the same time, Cornel West, having seen what happened to Bernie Sanders and been a part of Bernie Sanders like campaigns.
And they're close friends. Yeah.
Exactly. He's like, I already know what they would do. So it does not make sense for me to run through the Democratic Party. When you see someone like him step up and come forward, because I told my audience, I was like, Cornel West does not have to do this. He can just retire and just chill on the beach. He doesn't have to run for president. To me, that kind of said that Dr. West sees that there's a sense of urgency and things really need to change. So to me, I kind of saw it as though he's taking it to that next level where Bernie Sanders wouldn't go. Bernie would not run outside of the Democratic Party. He wasn't willing to do that. What do you think about like a Cornel West campaign? And then we can get into your opinions about RFK and Marianne as well.
Well, it's funny that you bring this up because I, with my podcast co-host, Walter Kern, and we talked about Dr. West a lot last week. I remember during the Sanders runs, and I had a lot of friends who were either worked in the campaign or around the Sanders campaign. I was very interested in what was going to happen with that campaign. And there was this huge question that hovered over both of his runs. What do we do if we don't win? Right? What do we do with this huge amount of support that we've suddenly and unexpectedly amassed? And by the way, just to give you a sense of how unexpected this was for Bernie. Bernie had an early turnout at an event in Maine in his 2016 run, where they had so many people show up that they had to get a bigger venue. And Bernie thought this was the only time that was ever going to happen. He actually sent his staff to go get basically legal pads and try to go through the crowd and get everybody's addresses so that he wouldn't lose track of all of these supporters. Like, he thought that was his one chance to get a big audience. They had no idea what was coming, that this was going to be this national phenomenon where they got 37% of the vote or whatever it was. So they didn't know what to do. And when the question presented themselves the first time, I think, it was harder for Bernie. It was actually, he came closer to actually protesting against the party, I think in part because he dislikes Hillary so much personally. They were always really nasty to him, the Clintons, and it was an open question to him whether he was going to defy her or campaign hard or whatever it was. But he got along well with Joe Biden. He had always been friends with him. Remember, Bernie had to move from the House to the Senate, and he needed to be kind of mentored by some folks there. And Joe was somebody who was always there for him. And it was hard for him to imagine this idea of, burning it all down and taking a hard line with the party and demanding that they do something. Well, it's not hard for Dr. West. Obviously, he's a very outspoken man. He knows exactly what he believes in. He operates out of principle, not out of politics. I think that's very clear. And he has no compunction whatsoever about dealing out, some discomfort and pain to the Democratic Party. And for all those folks who are calling him a spoiler candidate, remember, there's no such thing anymore. Anybody can win, right? Like Donald Trump proved this. People thought it was mathematically impossible for somebody like that to win, or for Bernie, for that matter, to get as close as he did. The instant he gets over 6 or 7% in the polls, he becomes a major factor in this race, and he's almost there right now, isn't he? Cornell West. So I think his race is it's a major undercovered story right now, because nobody wants to deal with the reality of it. I mean, they're going to have to cover it at some point, but he's for real. And I think also Americans, when they listen to him talk, they're going to find that they like him a lot more than they expect to, because he sort of radiates sincerity, courage, principle. A lot of things that are sort of absent from modern politics are very evident in him, and they translate very well in this new environment. Sorry, I'm going on about this, but I just think his whole phenomenon is very interesting. So yeah, you're right to focus on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because I've been saying for a long time it would be great if we had someone that was going to run third party independent that was popular, that people knew. Like Jesse Ventura came close to that at one point for 2020. Now, like, oh, that would be great. A lot of people know who Jesse Ventura is. And now here we are. And I think just listening to like MSNBC, people like Simone Sanders, Chuck Todd, etc., they are very, very scared because it is Dr. West. And it's hard for them to criticize him the way that they could some of the other candidates, because Dr. West knows so many people and a lot of people like him. It's hard to like attack someone when you're interviewing them and they call you brother. And he says that to everyone, whether it's Fox News or whether it's, MSNBC or CNN. And I think they're really concerned about that. But what's weird to me is that they talk about this 2024 race as though it's just owed to Joe Biden. We should just give it to him because he's already sitting there, when Joe Biden's having difficulty talking, difficulty walking. And it's very clear that I don't think he has the mental capacity to be president again for another 4 years. But mainstream media, they have their talking points, particularly from the State Department, and they're just telling people, no, you're gonna go ahead and just pick him anyway because we say so. And I'm curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, I covered Biden a little bit in 2020, and I had one of the moments that was sort of changed my attitude about politics a little bit and journalism came when I watched a speech of his, and he, in the middle of it, clearly lost track of where he was, what he was talking about. It was very obvious that he was struggling with the basic process of campaigning, of figuring out what his affect should be. Like, he would sometimes give a speech, and when he was supposed to go soft, he would be rageful. And when it was supposed to be the opposite, he would do that. He was poking people in the chest. He was doing all these inappropriate things. I called up a psychiatrist who had been a source for a story about the idea that Donald Trump might need to be revoked according to the 25th Amendment. And Rolling Stone had asked me to do this story. I thought it was a little kind of silly, but I did the story anyway, and he was very willing to talk about Donald Trump's mental problems in that interview. When I called this guy back about Joe Biden, he wouldn't talk on the record, and it was so totally dishonest, like this idea that here's somebody who's willing to violate this ethical code for this partisan reason. But you have somebody who might be president of the United States, who might be carrying the nuclear briefcase, and might really be demented, and they don't want to talk about that. It's just crazy, and they can't hide it anymore. It was very smart of them not to campaign for the rest of 2024, but now what are they going to do? They have 18 months left to go in this thing, or however long it is. That they can't hide it. And imagine him trying to debate somebody like Cornell West, or even trying to parry with him across the internet. West is so quick on his feet. He's so eloquent, and Biden can barely get through a sentence. It's embarrassing. And to watch all these people, defend it and just say, yeah, it's our duty to cast a vote for him. Why is that the case? Why do we owe this person our vote? This person who, because he's got institutional authorities behind them, we can get new institutional authorities behind somebody else. I just don't understand that reasoning.
100%. And I'm curious what you think about RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson choosing to run through the Democratic Party to primary Joe Biden. We've already heard that the Democratic Party, or the DNC, has decided there are not going to be any Democrat primary debates, which I think is ridiculous. I think there should be debates, especially considering the way that they're polling. But how do you feel about that? Now, I've had this conversation with Marianne. I told her, you already been through this. You ran in 2020. You know what the DNC is like. They're not going to let you debate. They're just not going to even give you the super delegates if need be. They'll let you get a few to make it seem like they're legit. But we all know how this worked with Bernie 2 election cycles in a row. And then particularly also with RFK Jr., who is getting a lot of attention, a lot of press. But I think it would be very disappointing for the American people to not see all three of those people. And there may be more. There's rumblings of Joe Manchin, not see all three of those people actually have a Democrat primary debate. Do you think it's even worth their time? And do you think they should have a plan B when this is all done with?
Well, first of all, not allowing debates. What do you think the likely result of that is? It's just going to make more people support both of those candidates. They're going to be mad about that. And they're going to, it may affect the general election voting for Joe Biden. This idea, you're asking me to coddle the candidate because you think an incumbent president of the United States can't handle a debate, with these two figures. That doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. Both of those candidates are very interesting. I met Marianne in Iowa in the last cycle, and I was very impressed by her effect on the crowd. Like she seemed very interested in the topics that we were just talking about. This whole idea about people who are on the wrong end of the stick and are fighting against a corporate system that doesn't work really for almost anybody anymore. And that was the theme that she went with. And I thought she was really eloquent about that. That kind of voice needs to be heard. RFK is, he's someone who has a lot of knowledge about a lot of topics. I disagree with him about a few things, but remember, his campaign manager is Dennis Kucinich, who is almost like the prophet of modern liberalism. I mean, all of the things that he ran on in 2004 and 2008, everybody said he was crazy, and now they're conventional politics in America, legalization of marijuana, even the trans issues. This is a guy who does know what it means to be poor. He grew up homeless and lived in a car, so it's a completely different sensibility than this, the kinds of candidates that they're putting forward, the DNC candidates. They need to be heard. They need to have that debate, but they can't have it because there's nothing they can run on. So they're going to do this thing where they shut these voices out and just hope and hold on for dear life and hope that they can get to the general election and beat somebody who may even be in prison by then. The fact that they're trailing in that general election is just, it should be such a wake-up call, but it's not. It's amazing.
I agree 100%. So one of the questions the question I have for the poll for people, I'll have to look at it later. But if RFK Jr., because he's polling higher than Marianne Williamson, if RFK Jr. does not win the Democratic primary, which I don't believe they will let him win, do you think if he were to change his position, let's say on Israel and Palestine, because that's where him and Dr. West fundamentally disagree, if he were to change his position on Israel and Palestine, do you think he should team up with Dr. West through the Green Party? How do you feel about that?
That's an interesting idea. I don't know if they would go for it. They have some issues they'd have to smooth over there that are not inconsequential, I think. But I'd be in favor of a third party run by RFK. He should do it because, look, if the Democratic Party is not going to fight fair, if they're going to do things like exclude people from debating or have the candidate not campaign, then sorry, you deserve a third party challenge that's going to take votes away from you. That's how politics works. If you want to do it the right way and give people a fair shot, and you still prevail, then you have the right to ask somebody like Bernie Sanders to campaign for you and get out of the way. But if you're going to be dirty about it, you got to expect that there are going to be consequences. And I think they should play hardball if that happens.
Well said. I'm also curious to hear your perspective about this. Let's say it does come down to Biden and Trump again, even though there's been multiple indictments against Donald Trump. I still think he's still in this race. He is still polling very high among the Republican primary challengers, and he continues to increase every time he gets a new indictment. It's just something that I've noticed. But if it comes down to Biden and Trump again, and then there's also Dr. West, that's the thing about running third party or independent, guys. You still get to be there at the end. Like, that's the thing. What do you think is going to happen? Do we get Trump again, or do you think Biden will win re-election?
Well, Biden has, as terrible as he is traditionally as a candidate, he does have this interesting ability to kind of retain sort of amorphously this base of support. That was an underreported story in 2020. He kept being dismissed over and over again because he was so terrible on the stump. And most of us campaign reporters are trained to think if somebody is awful on TV or if they make gaffes that they can't succeed. He does continue to maintain his numbers usually, although that has not been the case lately. Right now, it's going downward quickly now. But the direction of the Democratic Party support has not been positive. There was a trend that started in 2020 where they started to lose votes with Hispanic voters, Black men. It was a small change in 2020, but it was noticeable enough to make some pollsters write a few things. And then women overall, oddly enough, right? But he lost tremendously with white men. But those trends have now been expanded, and they don't seem to be affected by his legal status. In fact, it seems like if he's in jail, that might actually help him somehow. And so, I could easily see a situation where it would be the most amazing reality show in history. He'd be, it'd be like the movie Shot Caller. He'd be sitting in the yard with a couple of Secret Service agents conducting the presidency, surrounded by cartons of Marlboros. It would be amazing to watch, but I think it could happen.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I think that we're in a time, like, I can only imagine what the history books are going to look like like when we're older. Like, what are the history like textbooks going to look like for this time period, like of our lives? Because it's just so many things are happening. The fires right now that are happening in Hawaii, this is another thing that a lot of people are pointing out on social media. Joe Biden seems to be absent. He was at the beach yesterday, and I'm seeing videos of people in Hawaii saying that things are actually worse than what mainstream media is telling you. Where is the help? Where's the military? That they have this expensive, defense budget. Where's the National Guard? Where's all this help coming to people in Hawaii? And then at the same time, you see Joe Biden asking Congress for $24 billion for Ukraine.
Right. And this is one of the things that really killed George Bush. His presidency, I think, really took a sharp nosedive after Katrina for a couple of reasons. Because number one, it put the real state of American cities on television and how people lived. I mean, I was there. I remember thinking, wow, when people see this, they're going to do a double take if they've been watching sitcoms for their entire lives. And then the other thing is, the seeming kind of let them eat cake attitude about the whole thing that emanates from the White House in these situations. It just plays so badly, and they're doing it again. This idea of approving $200 million of aid yesterday for Ukraine, asking for billions more, but these problems in America, they're going to keep happening, and people they're not going to be happy about it. It's the same. It's a similar phenomenon. Sorry to go on, but it's similar to the bailouts in 2008. People got upset with Barack Obama because they thought, wow, we're doing terribly. Everybody's, millions of people are getting kicked out of their homes, and we're investing all of the national treasure into the people who caused the crisis. Where's our share? And that's where the anchor comes from. And these things build up. It's like one insult after another, and before you know it, you have a population that's got 9 or 10 different grievances, and you can never get them back. And that's why these moments are important.
Well said. I have 2 more questions for you, Matt. In reference to the media, because the media plays a big role in electoral politics and how a lot of Americans decide what they're going to do come election day. What do you feel is going to happen with mainstream media, particularly MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, because their ratings have declined since Trump lost in 2020? And I think a lot of these commentators are well aware, and they know that it's kind of like their days are numbered. We watch CNN like switch different hosts and different time slots. They fired a couple of people, some for behavior reasons, but others just because of ratings issue. 10 years from now, do you think that the majority of Americans are going to depend on mainstream media when it comes to electoral politics, and why or why not?
I don't think they really depend on them now, honestly. I think the end of that era was 2016, and I remember this because I was, I covered the campaign, every one of them from 2004 on, and I remember being on the bus with these reporters, and not long ago, they were unbelievably arrogant. There was a sense in their group conversations that we can decide who gets to be called electable, who gets to be called fringe, who we're going to pick on, who we're going to give a hard time, right? So when Howard Dean came out and he was, against the Iraq war, 100 times a day, they would ask him, are you too soft on defense? Are you too left? That kind of thing. But with John Kerry, it was one softball after another. They would call Dennis Kucinich elfin, right? They would call Ron Paul fringe or loony. There was always some kind of descriptor that went with that. And they really reveled in the power that they had to signal to the public who you can vote for and who you can't vote for. And people like Mark Halperin, who has now sort of been canceled, but he talked about this thing called the Gang of 500, who were the 500 most important people in Washington who decided who got to be president and who didn't. And they were like all people in his Rolodex, basically. Well, that's gone now, right? Like Donald Trump steamrolled over that. He didn't need the media. He used Twitter to talk to the audience. And they can see now that their influence is waning really, really quickly, and they're furious about it. But instead of doing the logical thing, which is going and listening to people and finding out what their concerns are and just reporting it, which is the easy way to do it, they are circling wagons and finding new ways to insult the electorate, which is exactly the way to lose audience. I just think that they're going to end up giving that audience away to somebody else who understands the voters better.
Matt, these were two questions from the audience. Did you interview RFK? I thought at one point I saw something that said you were going to.
I talked to him briefly at Freedom Fest. I've talked to him a few times over the years, and I know Kucinich very well, so I'm in touch with the campaign a bit.
Okay, awesome. And the other question I had for you is, this is another one that people keep asking me, of all people, but I know you were writing a book at one point. People are wondering, number one, are you finished with the book? And two, if you are finished with the book, are you returning to Useful Idiots?
Ooh, I'm not finished with the book. I'm still writing it. Don't know when that will be finished. And I don't know about Useful Idiots. We'll have to see. But it turned. I've had about 4 or 5 stops and starts with the book project. The Twitter files kind of interrupted that whole thing. I was supposed to be writing about one thing, and now I'm kind of in this other place. So we'll see. I miss Katie. We do talk all the time, and we had a lot of fun doing the show. But it might happen. The thing I'm doing with Walter now is, I was a big fan of Spy Magazine as a kid, and we sort of geek out on things like books and all that, and it's a little bit less political, but maybe we'll see.
Are you gonna talk to Elon, or have you heard from Elon since all this went down?
No, I haven't talked to him since that whole thing happened. It's sad, but he's a complicated figure, and I think I'll leave it at that. It's funny. People throughout the Twitter files period, people were, calling me a lapdog for Elon Musk and all these things. I think they don't really understand the complicated nature of the relationship between a journalist and a source. You're sort of like a confidant, so it's unseemly to go out and say negative things about somebody who has, opened up to you and told you things in confidence and all that. It's sort of like, if a doctor were to start talking about a patient. So I'm in an awkward position with Musk. Like, there are things I can't say, and I don't want to say, because I want future sources to know that, whatever they tell me is going to stay between us. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, if you hear from him again, will you please tell him that if he's going to do Twitter Spaces for presidential candidates, to do them for all of them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he absolutely should. I mean, what can I say? He's got some unique tendencies, let's put it that way, and he likes who he likes. So it's unfortunate, but it's gonna go the way it goes.
It is what it is.
Yeah, as Bill Belichick would say.
I know. All right, Matt, thanks so much for hanging out.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. I appreciate it. And take care of New England for me. I appreciate, and thanks for reaching out.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.